Jasmine Crockett fires back at Pam Bondi's threats, exposes the system in shocking live TV moment. The threat came live, wrapped in studio lights and corporate logos. Pam Bondi, former Attorney General and faithful relic of the Trump machine, leaned into the camera, voice sharpened to a blade. "She better be very careful," Bondi hissed, eyes glinting under the glow of Fox News stage makeup. "What she's calling for is domestic terrorism." Somewhere across the country, Jasmine Crockett leaned back in her chair, watching it unfold. Calm, steady, silent. The footage replayed across every right-wing network like wildfire, a coordinated chorus of fear. Bondi's voice grew louder in reruns, more distorted, dripping with veiled threats and weaponized outrage. But Jasmine Crockett knew the script better than they did. This wasn't about one birthday wish or one billionaire's fragile ego. This was the playbook: intimidate, vilify, erase. It wouldn't work. Not this time. She had seen the rot too closely. The contracts Musk inked behind closed doors. The federal protection granted to private empire while regular Americans begged for crumbs. The silent endorsement of a justice system that bent its knee to wealth. Musk didn't just fire workers. He fired communities' livelihoods, dreams. And now, the machine rallied to protect him, not with reason, but with threats disguised as patriotism. Jasmine Crockett's words had been clear, deliberate. "I don't like Elon Musk. I don't like how he treats people. And I have the right to say it." She had even urged protesters to consult lawyers to stay peaceful, to understand their rights before stepping onto any street. Yet, that caution was twisted into sedition by those desperate to protect their own. Pam Bondi knew exactly what she was doing. Threatening a sitting member of Congress painting dissent as danger was a calculated move. It wasn't about Crockett's words. It was about silencing the truth before it spread. Because here's the truth they feared most: Elon Musk had built a kingdom above the law. His wealth made him untouchable. His influence bent federal agencies to his will. His failures were brushed aside by headlines. His wrongs defended by bought loyalty. And now, the very guardians of justice rushed to shield him from a woman armed with nothing but her voice. Pam Bondi, who once sold her soul for campaign donations, now wielded the full weight of a corrupted narrative against a congresswoman who dared to tell inconvenient truths. But Crockett didn't blink, didn't flinch. She sat before a storm of lies and threats, and simply waited. Because she knew that sometimes the most powerful response wasn't to shout over the noise, it was to outlast it. The real terror wasn't Crockett's birthday wish. It was a system that had normalized silence. A machine that told Americans they should be grateful for billionaires who hoarded opportunity. A government that would rather label a black woman in Congress a terrorist than confront the sins of its chosen sons. Pam Bondi's performance was not justice. It was desperation dressed as authority. And Crockett. She was not alone. Across the country, the real America stirred. The mothers laid off when Musk's restructuring hit small towns. The factory workers locked out of Tesla plants. The contractors unpaid after cost-saving cuts. People who watched their futures auctioned off to corporate kings and were told to smile about it. They heard Bondi's threat and saw it for what it was: fear of a truth too raw to be spun. Crockett's silence on that day wasn't weakness. It was the tightening of a noose around the lie. Let them speak, she thought. Let them reveal exactly who they were. Because while Pam Bondi shouted domestic terrorism into a studio microphone, Jasmine Crockett prepared something more powerful than any talking point evidence. Receipts of contracts protected by federal shields. Emails confirming special designations for Musk's security details. Voices of former employees armed with NDA violations and nothing left to lose. And above all, the Constitution itself, the promise that free speech was not a privilege granted by billionaires or media moguls, but a right earned by blood and sacrifice. The irony bled through every frame of Bondi's televised tirade. They accused Crockett of inciting violence, while ignoring the 3 explosive devices found that very morning in Austin, Texas, a city suffocating under the contradictions they refused to confront. Not Crockett's words, their neglect, their impunity, their betrayal. And now, when challenged, they defaulted to the only weapon they had left: fear. But fear only works when the people targeted still believe they have something left to lose. Crockett knew better. She had already watched too many rights trampled, too many communities gutted. She had learned the hard way that silence was not protection, it was permission, and she refused to grant it. She watched Bondi's face frozen mid-snarl on the TV screen and understood the deeper truth: it wasn't Crockett they were afraid of. It was the mirror she held up to their empire of exemptions and excuses. A mirror that reflected every broken promise, every poisoned contract, every worker discarded like debris. A mirror that showed America not the fantasy sold in campaign ads, but the rot crawling just beneath the surface. And Pam Bondi, for all her threats, for all her titles, for all her Fox News stagecraft, could not shatter that mirror. She could only scream at it. The truth stood. And it was about to get louder. Not with shouting, not with chaos, but with the slow, deliberate unraveling of a system built on silence. The next morning, before the pundits could sharpen their knives, Jasmine Crockett moved first. No press conference. No fiery tweet. Just a single scanned image posted quietly to her official account, a federal contract dated and signed awarding Elon Musk's private security firm a status usually reserved for state law enforcement. No caption. No explanation. Only a line at the bottom, filed under national security exemption. The internet froze. Then it detonated. Journalists scrambled to verify. Legal analysts debated on air, their polished confidence cracking under the weight of what they were reading. Federal protection. For a private billionaire's security detail. How many others had been hidden under the same veil? Fox News anchors stammered, pivoting, spinning. Suddenly, the story wasn't about Jasmine Crockett's birthday wish. It was about the contracts, the exemptions, the rot exposed in broad daylight. And Bondi. She went silent. For the first time in days, the righteous fury evaporated from the airwaves. In its place, panic cloaked as confusion. Because Crockett hadn't just struck back. She had shifted the battlefield. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was an indictment. The machine had underestimated her. Again. They thought she was another headline to crush another fire to put out with outrage. But Crockett wasn't built for scandal. She was built for evidence, for courtrooms, for cross-examinations where facts, not volume, decided who walked free. And now America had entered her courtroom. In the hours that followed, more documents surfaced. A spreadsheet leaked from the Department of Energy showing preferential contracts given to Musk's ventures bypassing standard bidding procedures. A voice recording from a Tesla employee whistleblower recounting how they were instructed to not worry about OSHA because special permissions had been granted. Emails between federal officials and Musk's legal team discussing cooperative adjustments to workplace regulations to accommodate innovation. The picture was no longer one of isolated corruption. It was systemic complicity. The promise that government served the people, shattered by the reality that when it came to the richest men in the world, government served only them. And Crockett stood in the center of it, unmoved. They came for her freedom. She responded by putting their empire on trial. Inside Capitol Hill, the whispers began. Committee aides huddled behind closed doors. Staffers drafted talking points, desperate to distance their bosses from the radioactive fallout. Some quietly deleted old photo ops with Musk from their social media feeds. The silence grew heavier than any scream. Pam Bondi, once so loud, now reduced to offhand statements and closed-door damage control. No more primetime warnings, no more bluster about domestic terrorism, because now the evidence was the terrorist, and it was coming for them all. In the middle of the chaos, Crockett stayed unnervingly quiet. She understood something they didn't. You don't rush a landslide. You let the mountain move on its own. And it was moving. Reporters camped outside Tesla factories, interviewing laid-off workers who spoke of unsafe conditions, secret settlements, gag orders. Parents whose children were hurt on factory floors without medical support, their cases dismissed as internal matters. The human cost of Musk's empire no longer hid behind glossy PR campaigns. It walked out in wheelchairs and funeral black. And every news story, every leaked email, every whistleblower, brave enough to speak all of it, traced back to the moment Pam Bondi went on national television and tried to muzzle a congresswoman. They pulled the trigger. Crockett lit the fuse. And America watched as the tower began to shake. There was a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, when the machine realized it had lost control. It wasn't when the contracts leaked. Not when the protests spread to Tesla dealerships nationwide. Not even when Crockett announced she would be holding a televised hearing on corporate corruption and federal complicity. It was when ordinary people stopped asking if the system was broken and started asking who broke it. And every road led back to the same faces. The same hands signing exemptions, the same smiles standing beside billionaires at ribbon cuttings, the same politicians warning about domestic threats while selling national security to the highest bidder. They thought they were invincible, shielded by wealth by media, spin by public apathy. They forgot that once people see the rot, they cannot unsee it. And Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't finished. No, she was just getting started. Inside her office, lit by the same battered lamp and littered with stacks of receipts, Crockett drafted her next move. Calm, surgical, irreversible. A public dossier, a simple name. Federal Complicity Project. Every contract, every exemption, every backdoor deal. Released. One by one, day by day. Not dumped in a flood that could be dismissed as hacked or foreign interference. Slow. Relentless, impossible to ignore. Every release would be a wound, every wound a reminder. They wanted war. She brought sunlight, and sunlight. Crockett knew is the one thing even the thickest lies cannot survive. The first release came at dawn. No grand announcement, no rally. Just a quiet upload to the public record server, time-stamped, certified, and indisputable. It was a contract. Dry language, cold formatting. But the devil was never in the drama, it lived in the fine print. One clause buried deep on page 73, authorization for a private Tesla unit to coordinate directly with Department of Homeland Security assets in situations of strategic interest. A billionaire's private militia, written into law, funded by taxpayers. It hit Washington like a controlled demolition. Quiet. Precise. Catastrophic. Within an hour, Crockett's office phone began vibrating nonstop. Journalists, legal scholars, congressional aides, allies and enemies alike. Everyone wanted the same thing, a statement. Crockett gave none, because statements could be spun, evidence could not. Instead, she simply posted a second document, an internal email chain between White House officials and Tesla executives arranging informal immunity for certain environmental violations retroactively months after they were committed. No wonder Musk acted invincible. He was. Until now. The White House scrambled to issue non-denials laced with bureaucratic word salad. These contracts were in accordance with established procedures. No special treatment was granted. But it was too late. America wasn't listening to excuses anymore. They were reading the receipts. Cable news anchors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Some still clung to their scripts calling Crockett reckless, irresponsible, unpatriotic. But their eyes betrayed them. They had seen it, and they knew the game had changed. Meanwhile, the Federal Complicity Project continued to grow. Crockett's team, a skeleton crew of volunteer lawyers, paralegals, and whistleblowers, worked in rotations, cross-referencing documents, annotating corruption into oblivion. Every leak was timed like a heartbeat. Steady. Undeniable. Lethal. By the third day, the old guard was in full panic mode. GOP operatives flooded the airwaves with counterattacks trying to smear Crockett's credibility, questioning the validity of documents certified by their own agencies. It didn't work. You can't unsign a contract. You can't unread a betrayal. And, as the documents stacked up memo after memo, signature after signature, the American public began stitching the truth together themselves. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't accident. It was by design. A two-tiered system, one America for the wealthy, few, another for everyone else. Crockett didn't have to tell them. She just had to show them. And she did. Every day. Relentlessly. Inside Congress, allies who had once hesitated now rallied behind her. Hearings were called. Subpoenas issued. Suddenly, it was Musk's executives who found themselves lawyering up not protesters, waving homemade signs. The irony was almost too rich. Pam Bondi, the self-proclaimed guardian of law and order, found herself ducking reporters outside Senate chambers, no longer issuing threats, but muttering evasions. No, she hadn't personally reviewed the contracts. No, she wasn't directly involved in enforcement exemptions. No, she wasn't aware that her televised threat could be construed as intimidation. Each denial stripped a little more armor from the machine. Each refusal to answer tightened the noose Crockett had quietly built. And Crockett. She remained, as she had always been, still relentless, inevitable. Not chasing cameras, not trading barbs, building the case. Building the brick by brick, truth by truth. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. Outside Tesla showrooms, peaceful protesters gathered not in mobs, but in vigils. Parents holding photos of lost jobs, injured children, broken communities. Signs scrawled not with slogans, but with simple damning questions. Who protects us? Where was our immunity? Why is truth called terrorism? Pam Bondi's words, once weaponized against Crockett, now hung around her own neck like a millstone. Because Crockett hadn't needed to incite violence. She hadn't needed to raise her voice. She only needed to shine enough light that America could see itself. And what they saw was unforgivable. Yet even as the walls closed, and Crockett knew the fight wasn't finished, the machine wouldn't surrender easily. Power never does. Already whispers of retaliation spread, obscure ethics investigations launched against Crockett, anonymous threats flooding her office lines. Fox News panels convened nightly to speculate on foreign meddling, trying desperately to reframe her evidence as a weapon of enemies abroad. They missed the point. Crockett's weapon wasn't stolen. It was earned. Forged in the overlooked towns gutted by Musk's promises. Tempered in the courtrooms where truth was silenced by procedure. Sharpened by every mother who had buried a future, while billionaires toasted another tax break. She didn't need foreign hackers. She had the receipts, and the will to show them. As her dossier expanded, so did the stakes. It wasn't just Musk anymore. New names surfaced: defense contractors lobbying for experimental projects on American soil. Tech giants securing surveillance contracts through undisclosed back channels. Republican donors receiving multi-million-dollar emergency grants with no oversight. The rot was deeper than anyone feared. And Crockett. She was done playing defense. The next phase wouldn't be a leak. It would be an indictment. Literal. On live television. In a few days' time, she would walk into the Oversight Committee chamber, carrying nothing but a battered leather briefcase. No lawyers, no entourage, no anger. Just the truth. And an empty chair waiting for every coward who thought power could shield them from accountability. Because in the end, sunlight didn't just expose the lies, it burned them. And Jasmine Crockett was walking into that hearing, carrying the sun itself. The marble halls of the Oversight Committee echoed with every step she took. No entourage, no press handler smoothing the way. Only Crockett, her worn leather briefcase, and the unbearable weight of truth vibrating around her like a silent drumbeat. Cameras turned, not flashing, freezing. Staffers stiffened against the walls, clutching binders filled with talking points, now rendered obsolete. GOP members shuffled in their seats, pretending to check their phones, avoiding her gaze. They knew. Everyone knew. Today wasn't another partisan spectacle. Today wasn't another performance for primetime cable news. Today was reckoning. Crockett placed her briefcase on the witness table with deliberate slowness, the click of the lock snapping through the chamber like gunshots. She didn't sit immediately. She stood there poised, breathing, allowing the weight of what was about to unfold to settle into every crevice of the room. Silence. Heavy. Sacred. The chairman cleared his throat awkwardly. Congresswoman Crockett, you may proceed. She nodded once. No speech, no preamble. She simply opened the briefcase. Inside, not weapons, not accusations, not fury. Documents, letters, photos, receipts. Crockett pulled out the first folder and laid it flat on the table. An oversized projection screen blinked to life behind her, and with a simple nod to the technician, the first image appeared. A procurement form. Federal seal. Musk's signature. Top right corner, classified national security designation. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Throats cleared. And then Crockett spoke low, steady, each word cut from stone. This, she said, is a contract between the United States Department of Energy and Tesla Incorporated, granting Mr. Musk's private security forces federal law enforcement privileges in multiple jurisdictions without congressional oversight, without local consent, and without public disclosure. She paused. Letting the horror seep. You will notice, she continued, this designation was signed, not by a security expert, not by an elected official, but by a corporate attorney formerly employed by Tesla, recently appointed to the department's advisory board. Another document flashed. Another signature. Another betrayal. No one interrupted. No one dared. Crockett moved methodically, a surgeon slicing away at the cancer of collusion, each revelation more damning than the last. Environmental waivers, labor violations, safety exemptions, contracts rewritten in back rooms while Americans lost jobs, homes, lives. Every signature, another nail. Every exemption, another crime. And still, Crockett's voice never rose, because the evidence shouted loud enough. Across the room, Pam Bondi sat stiffly behind her legal counsel, her face a mask of strained politeness. She had insisted on attending publicly, boasting about confronting Crockett face to face. Now, she couldn't meet her eyes. Crockett turned a page. Projected behind her an internal email from Bondi to Musk's chief legal officer. Subject line, RE Protest Suppression Coordination. In it, Bondi offered strategic communication support to manage public dissent in exchange for mutual policy advancement, once Musk's lobbying objectives were achieved. The room inhaled sharply, for a heartbeat time froze. Then a low, disbelieving murmur rippled through the chamber. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply placed the next document on the table with the same grim finality. Evidence of a government official weaponizing public fear to protect private wealth. Evidence of the very corruption they had tried to bury her under. Pam Bondi's face drained of color. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair, white-knuckled. Crockett waited. Let it sink. Let it burn. When the murmurs finally died, Crockett spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. This, she said, gesturing to the mountain of evidence now suffocating the witness table, is not a partisan dispute. She let the words breathe. This is not about left or right. A pause. Deeper. Cutting. This is about the fact that somewhere along the line, some decided that wealth was worth more than loyalty to the American people. The projection shifted again. Photos this time. A laid-off factory worker in front of a shuttered Tesla plant. A family evicted after losing everything to Musk's automation initiative. A child holding a folded American flag, their father killed in a factory accident, hushed by NDAs and corporate lawyers. Real faces. Real costs. The kind no corporate bonus could erase. Crockett's voice broke slightly, then not from weakness, but from the unbearable honesty of grief too long ignored. You cannot call dissent terrorism, she said simply, because it embarrasses you. A beat. You cannot cloak your crimes in the flag while trampling the people it belongs to. Another beat. And you cannot threaten those who choose to remember when you have chosen to forget. There were no rebuttals, no clever sound bites, just a room filled with the unbearable, unspinnable truth. Pam Bondi shifted again, visibly shrinking under the weight of her own exposure. Fox News anchors tuned in, live fell silent. Producers behind the glass flailed, unsure whether to cut the feed or let America watch its own shame unfold. Crockett placed the final item from her briefcase onto the table. A child's Medal of Valor, tarnished, scratched, precious. She lifted it carefully, held it up for the committee, for the cameras, for the nation. This belonged to a young man who believed in the promise of this country, she said. She placed it gently atop the mountain of documents. And you sold that promise? Silence dense and immovable crushed the chamber. The oversight chairman, normally a fierce partisan, stared at the medal as if it might burn him. In the back of the room, a reporter dropped his pen. And outside, across the country, millions of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, independents, sat frozen, realizing that this was never about politics. It was about betrayal. It was about memory. It was about the sacred debt owed to every citizen who had been abandoned so that a handful of billionaires could pretend they were gods. Jasmine Crockett closed her briefcase with a click so soft it felt like a gavel striking the bones of the guilty. She stood calm, unwavering, and as she turned to leave the chamber, the cameras caught it, the faintest shimmer of tears in her eyes. Not for herself, but for a country still worth saving. The doors of the Oversight Committee swung open, and Jasmine Crockett stepped into a hallway, pulsing with the crackling tension of a nation holding its breath. Reporters surged forward, microphones like bayonets, but she didn't pause. She didn't need to. She had already spoken in the only language that mattered, evidence, memory, grief. Behind her, the committee room remained stunned into a silence so deep it felt sacred. Not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of confrontation. The moment when a nation sees its own reflection and cannot look away. The footage replayed before it even finished airing. Every major network cut into their scheduled programming anchors, fumbling through choked commentary, struggling to wrap palatable language around what had just unfolded. No one had ever seen it done that way. Not with rage, not with spectacle, but with relentless surgical truth. By nightfall, Crockett's hearing wasn't just a trending topic, it was a movement. Receipts, not rhetoric, exploded across social media. Parents posted photos of lost pensions, closed factories, crushed futures. Veterans recorded videos holding their medals, asking, "Where was our immunity?" For the first time in decades, the American conversation wasn't about left versus right. It was about those who served and those who sold them out. In corporate boardrooms, crisis meetings ran into the early morning hours. Communications teams drafted emergency statements drenched in hollow patriotism. Lawyers whispered about plausible deniability. Lobbyists scrambled to scrub their footprints from Musk's contracts, but it was too late. The sunlight had already done its work. Crockett returned to her office long after midnight. No cheering crowds, no cameras, just the steady hum of a country finally stirring in its own defense. She sat at her battered desk, opened her laptop, and began reading the emails. Thousands. From veterans. From teachers. From mothers balancing 3 jobs after their factories closed. From whistleblowers ready to testify. Each one a spark. Each one a vow. In the days that followed, the machine tried to reboot itself. Pam Bondi, desperate to salvage her crumbling reputation, appeared on friendly networks pleading innocence. Taken out of context, she insisted. Standard procedures? But the weight of Crockett's evidence hung around her like lead. Republican leaders scrambled to reframe the narrative painting Crockett as a partisan grandstander. But the documents were bipartisan. The betrayal was bipartisan. And the rage was bipartisan. Americans weren't listening to talking points anymore. They were reading contracts. They were reading the fine print of their own exploitation. In town halls from Ohio to Arizona, citizens showed up clutching printouts from the Federal Complicity Project. They read line by line, demanding answers from politicians who could no longer hide behind slogans. What did you know? When did you know it? Why didn't you stop it? And the politicians, so used to bluster and deflection, found themselves gasping for air. Because truth does not negotiate. Truth does not blink. Truth does not forget. And Jasmine Crockett had made sure America didn't either. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice, under mounting public pressure, announced an independent investigation into federal contracting practices tied to Musk and his corporate allies. Subpoenas began flying. Grand juries were quietly convened. The rot once considered untouchable was now under forensic examination. In Tesla, headquarters security teams braced for raids. In private equity firms, phones burned with panicked calls. The old guards, once so smug behind their golden walls, finally realized what had happened. Jasmine Crockett hadn't started a fight. She had started a reckoning. And no amount of money, no constellation of political favors, could unring the bell she had sounded. One morning, a week after the hearing, Crockett stood alone again, this time at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. No cameras, no speeches, just her hand resting gently against the etched names of sacrifice. A silent promise. Not to destroy America, but to restore it. To its truth, to its honor, to its people. A small boy wandered up beside her, holding a folded flag in his arms, almost too big for him. His father's. Lost not to war overseas, but to a collapsed plant, stateside a casualty of corporate greed disguised as innovation. He looked up at Crockett, wide-eyed, uncertain. She knelt, lowering herself to his level. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. The boy extended the flag toward her small hands, trembling. Crockett placed her hand over his, steadying him, shaking her head gently. No, she whispered. That's yours? That's his memory. He clutched the flag tighter to his chest, and in that moment, everything that mattered, everything they were fighting for, existed between them. Silent, sacred, unbreakable. Crockett stood again, squaring her shoulders against a horizon still dark with the storm of corruption. But now a different light pushed back. Not just her light. America's. An America refusing to be gaslit into submission. An America that remembered that justice is not a slogan, it's a duty. An America that understood that truth, once seen, demands action. Jasmine Crockett turned from the memorial, her path clear. She didn't need applause. She didn't need permission. She carried with her the memory of every name etched into stone and every future still unwritten. And she walked forward, not in rage, not in fear, but in the unshakable knowledge that some battles are not fought with fists or slogans. They are fought with receipts, with remembrance, with relentless light. And Jasmine Crockett had become the sun they could no longer shut out. In the weeks that followed, America changed not with explosions, not with riots, but with the slow, irreversible gravity of awakening. Everywhere she went, Crockett carried no banners, led no rallies. She didn't need to. Her silence became a rallying cry, louder than any megaphone. City councils began passing resolutions demanding full transparency in federal contracting. Veterans groups, once apolitical by necessity, marched shoulder to shoulder in quiet processions, holding signs that simply read, "Not for sale." At Tesla, showrooms employees walked out not with anger, but with solemn dignity, laying their badges and security cards at the doors, like offerings on an altar of broken promises. Pam Bondi resigned under mounting pressure, not with defiance, but with a thin statement about new opportunities in the private sector. Her departure made no headlines. It was swallowed by the larger story she could no longer control. And Elon Musk, once the untouchable titan, found himself shackled not by protesters, but by auditors, investigators, and the slow grinding machine of justice he had long believed he could purchase immunity from. It was not a spectacle. It was a reckoning. A slow, unstoppable sunrise over the wreckage of a gilded age built on silence. Inside Congress, Crockett remained unchanged. No grand victory lap, no viral speeches, only the steady, deliberate filing of new legislation bills mandating full public disclosure of federal private contracts, banning national security exemptions for private security forces, and ensuring whistleblower protections for every government employee willing to break the silence. Each bill was met first with ridicule, then resistance, then slowly grudging acceptance, because Crockett wasn't negotiating with the old system. She was making it obsolete. One evening alone in her office, she received a package. No return address. Inside a small battered chair, child-sized, scuffed from years of use. Taped to it, a note written in an uneven hand. He said if he died, someone would tell the truth. You did? No signature? No explanation needed. Crockett placed the chair by her window, overlooking the Capitol dome glowing in the fading sunset. She didn't weep. She didn't speak. She simply sat for a long time, staring at the empty chair, the final silent witness to everything they had fought to forget. Outside, America moved forward. Not healed, not whole, but awake. Crockett understood what few in power ever grasped. Real change doesn't come with fanfare. It doesn't trend for a week and vanish. It lingers. It scars. It builds slow and relentless in the hearts of ordinary people who decide quietly and irrevocably that they will not go back to sleep. They had tried to silence her. They had called her dangerous, unpatriotic, terroristic. But in the end, Jasmine Crockett had asked for nothing more and nothing less than memory. Not justice, memory. Because justice could be delayed, denied, deferred. But memory was a weapon they could never disarm. And so she stayed. At her desk. At her window. Guarding that chair. Guarding every name, every voice. Every life, too long, buried under contracts and exemptions and lies. She stayed, not because she loved the fight, but because she loved the country that deserved better than to be sold to the highest bidder. She stayed because someone had to. Someone always had to. One night long after the Capitol lights dimmed and the last news cycle moved on, Crockett rose from her chair. She walked across her office. She placed her hand gently on the small battered chair, and she whispered the words that had carried her through every threat, every smear, every moment when the darkness threatened to win. They erased him. She remembered everything. No cameras captured it. No reporters transcribed it. It wasn't for them. It was for him. For all of them. And for a country bruised, battered, betrayed, still worth every fight. The chair stayed empty. The flag stayed folded. And Jasmine Crockett stayed. Because memory never leaves. It waits. It watches. It endures. Long after the headlines fade. Long after the cowards flee. Long after the rich find new gods to worship. The sun rises. The truth stands. And somewhere in a quiet office overlooking a bruised but unbroken America, a woman guards the memory they cannot bury. She doesn't need permission. She doesn't need applause. She carries the sun, and she is never leaving.